In this video, I will show you how you can turn a quiet mix into a loud mix. Together we will dive into a Ableton session of mine where I've prepared two different loops. One of them is a quiet version and one of them is a loud version. Both of these loops are identical, so I didn't change anything in the production, I didn't change any samples. All that I did were just some tweakings in the mixdown that I'm about to share with you on this video right here. Now at the bottom of the session I've printed both of these loops so we can actually see the waveforms. This one right here is the quiet version and this one is the loud version. And just by looking at the waveform we can already tell some differences. So the quiet version has a lot more of these very high transients and not so much in between the transients. And on the loud version it's kind of the opposite. So these transients, they are gone a little bit and in between we have just more stuff. If we just quickly change the view to this view right here, and we play the quiet version and we look at the peak value right here, we can see that it's peaking at around -6 dBs. And if we do the same with the loud version, we can see that it's also peaking at around -6 dBs, but this one is definitely a lot louder. So the peak value is kind of misleading for this kind of measurement, right? Because this doesn't really tell us anything about the perceived volume. To measure perceived volume, we're using a value called LUFS, and I just put a limiter on my master, the Pro L by Fab filter. And if you have this limiter down here, you can actually change the view. So if you toggle on loudness, you can see this view right here. And this kind of gives us the indication of how loud perceived something is. And if we just look at it now again with the quiet mix first, it is peaking at around -21 dBs LUFS. And if we now listen to the loud version, this one is peaking at -19 dBs LUFS. So the loud version is actually 2 dBs louder perceived than the quiet version. Now both of these loops are of course only mixdowns. In the mastering process, so in the last stage, these songs will get boosted even more. And a master is mostly in this type of music around -8 to -10 dBs LUFS. Now if I do a mastering, I will put a limiter on my mixdown, and this limiter will do some gain reductions at these very loud points. And as a rule of thumb, I try to aim for gain reduction values of around -4 dBs. You can also go heavier than that, but this really depends also on the style of music. So let's try that out right now. Let's boost this quiet mix right here into this limiter until we have a gain reduction value of around -4 dBs. Alright, so now we have this gain reduction of around -4 dBs and the LUFS value is now at -10.8 dBs. And if we do exactly the same limiter on our loud mix, so now you can see it is sitting at around -9 dBs. Now, of course, this value also changes depending on the place of the song. So maybe in the break it's a bit quieter and right after the drop it's probably louder. But yeah, you get the general idea. So now let me actually share with you how you can achieve such a mixdown by yourself. The first and probably also most important thing actually already comes before the mixdown process. And it already starts at the very beginning during the composition and production process. So what kind of sounds do you choose and how you place them in time? So here on this loop, I actually intentionally chose some poor samples and I also made some poor compositional decisions because I just wanted to show you how that will look like. So first of all, the kick drum is just a basic 808 kick drum. And if you want to get a really loud mixdown, you probably would choose another sample than just a simple 808. Next, we have the problem that the clap, the kick, the shaker, and this chord stab right here, they're all playing at the same time right here. So if we go down here to our print, we can see that these sharp transients right here, these are actually always the places where the kick drum, the clap, the shaker, and this stab are all playing together. Now what's actually also very important are just the volume levels of each individual track. So how they relate with each other and how loud is the kick drum compared to the hi-hat and to the clap, etc. Now the next thing that I want to share with you is equalization. So with an equalizer we can take away some unwanted frequencies, or we can boost areas that just need some enhancement. One thing, for example, is the sub bass and the bass that you can really separate with an equalizer, because if you have the sub bass and you have the bass and they both have a lot of these low frequency content, they will collide with each other. And if you just take an equalizer and you cut out these low ends a little bit, so let me just quickly check what I did here on the bass. So on the bass, I just made a low cut at 70 Hertz. And this will assure that the sub bass also has enough space for its own and doesn't collide with the bass. Now another thing that you can do is just surgically take out some resonances. So here on this right, for example, I took out here this very sharp resonance. If we just listen to the right by itself and I deactivate this band, this sharp resonance right here will also take up some space in the mixdown, and it will also limit how loud we can actually make our song. Now the next thing is all about compression and limiting. I put these things together because a limiter is basically a compressor but with a ratio of infinity. What you can use the compressor for is to keep things where they should be so they don't get too loud. You can like reduce the dynamic of it a little bit, and you can also duck things with certain other elements, so you can actually sidechain things. And here I, for example, used compression on the sub bass. So the sub bass, depending on the notes that it plays, it just gets louder and quieter, and I used quite a lot of compression on it to make sure that the notes are about the same volume. And I also did some multiband compression because these lower frequencies, they were still very ringy and very loud. And with the multiband compression, I just ensure that I can reduce these very low volumes that this compressor didn't really pick up on. And of course, I also have a sidechain compression with the kick drum. So when the kick drum plays, this compressor here gets stuck a little bit. Now limiting I used, for example, on this chord stab right here. It is now set to minus 5 dBs of gain reduction. And if you actually want to increase the volume of a limiter without the output also going up, so here you can now just drive up this volume and the stab will remain the same, but the limiting will occur more and more. You can do that with down here with this 1-on-1 setting. So if you toggle on that, if you boost the volume right here, the output will get turned down, and you can actually also use the limiter without actually increasing the volume. Now the fourth thing that I want to share with you is probably also my most favorite thing in Mixdown, and that is saturation and clipping. Now how our ears work is that we don't perceive all sounds at the same volume. We hear some frequencies a little bit louder than others, and this can be described with the Fletcher-Munson curve. And in there you can see that between 2 to 5 kilohertz, our ears are much more sensitive, and if we hear these sounds, they appear to be much louder. And if we know that, we can actually trick our brain into thinking that something is louder if we just boost these regions a little bit. And you can do that with an equalizer, but you can actually also do that with saturation. So if you saturate and just add some overtones at this area, this will make a sound much richer and also just much louder. Now, I actually add saturation to almost all of my elements. So to all of my higher drums. I don't add saturation too much to the kick drum, a little bit, but not too much, and also not too much to the sub bass. But other than that, I like to add a lot of saturation, especially to my hi-hats, but also to some of my melodies. And this just creates a richer soundscape. And one of the saturation tools that I like to use a lot is the Vertigo VSM 3. And on here, you just have 2 saturation units. And with this knob right here, you can choose the band. Now, the second thing that I mentioned is clipping. And clipping is actually super fun because with clipping, you can just cut off the top of a waveform. So it's actually kind of similar to limiting in a way, but the limiter does something different because the limiter reduces the volume when it crosses a certain threshold, and a clipper just cuts off the waveform at a certain threshold, and it just doesn't reduce the volume. So here, for example, I have this hi-hat, and if we now look at the peak value of this hi-hat, it is peaking now at minus 18.7 dBs, and if I add some clipping to it, it is now peaking at minus 23.8 dB. So we kind of gained 5 dBs, but the volume is still the same, and also it sounds almost the same because this hi-hat is almost only noise, and if you add clipping to that, it will add more noise, and noise just creates noise. And if you know that, we can really just cut off the top of these waveforms that don't cause a lot of problems. Now, the last thing is actually also very important, and that is bus or group processing. So up here you can see that all of these tracks, they're just simply in plain lying there. But down here, I have a drum group, I have a bass group, I have a melody group, and I also have a mix bus where I did some adjustments. And on these different groups, we kind of do the same adjustments that we already did before. So equalization, compression, saturation, and clipping, and limiting, of course. And this will just create a further step within this whole chain where you can do some adjustments. And a compressor, for example, just works differently if it's on a group instead of a single element. So this will also just glue everything a little bit together and just make everything a bit more coherent. Now, the very last thing that I want to add is actually stereo width, because stereo width is actually also important for perceived loudness, because if something is described as fat, it is mostly also wide. And if we know that, we could just make things a bit wider and use the whole stereo spectrum for sounds to fill it out. So, for example, the bass has some imaging on it, only on the higher frequencies. And also the melody, for example, has some reverb on it, just a little bit. And reverb will also add stereo width to a sound, and this will just also make sounds bigger and fatter. Alright, so this is it. I hope you liked this video. I hope you found this helpful. Please give me the thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. And yeah, see you on the next one. Peace.